When Bill Nelson's cow stopped giving milk, he called the veterinarian.
There's nothing wrong with that cow,
the vet said.
She's just stubborn. That or some witch got a hold of her.
Bill and the vet both laughed.
That old hag, Addie Fitch. I guess she's the closest we got to a witch around here,
the vet said.
But witches have gone out of style, haven't they?
Bill had a run-in with Addie Fitch the month before. He had hit her cat with his car and killed it.
I'm really sorry, Addie Fitch,
he told her.
I'll get you a new cat, just as pretty, just as good.
Her eyes filled with hate.
I raised that cat from a kitten,
she hissed.
I loved her. You'll be sore for this, Bill Nelson.
Bill sent her a new cat and heard nothing more. Then his cow stopped giving milk. Next, his old truck broke down. After that, his wife fell and broke her arm.
We're having a lot of bad luck,
he thought. Then he thought,
maybe it's Addie Fitch getting even.
And then,
hey, you don't believe in witches, you're just upset.
But Bill's grandpa believed in witches. He had once told Bill that there was only one sure way to stop a witch from causing trouble.
You find a black walnut tree,
he said,
and you draw her picture on it. Then you mark an X where her heart is, and you drive a nail into the X. Every day, you drive it in a little deeper. If she's causing the trouble,
he said,
she'll feel pain. When she can't stand it anymore, she'll come to you or send somebody and try to borrow something. If you give her what she wants, that breaks the power of the nail, and she'll go on tormenting you. But if you don't, she has to stop, or the pain will kill her.
That's what his nice, gentle old grandpa believed.
That's pure craziness,
Bill thought. Of course, his grandpa didn't have much schooling. Bill had been to college. He knew better. Then Bill's dog Joe, a perfectly healthy dog, dropped dead. Just like that. It made Bill angry. Despite all his schooling, he thought,
maybe it's Addie Fitch after all.
He got a red crayon from his son's room, and a hammer and a nail, went into the woods. He found a black walnut tree, drew a picture of Addie Fitch on it. He made an X where her heart was, like his grandpa had said to do. With the hammer, he drove the nail a little way into the X. Then he went home.
I feel like a fool,
he told his wife.
You should,
she said. The next day, a boy named Timmy Logan came by.
Addie Fitch isn't feeling well,
he said.
She wonders if she could borrow some sugar from you.
Bill Nelson stared at Timmy in amazement. He took a deep breath.
Tell her I'm sorry, but I don't have any sugar right now,
he said. When Timmy Logan left, Bill went back to the walnut tree, drove the nail in another inch. Next day, the boy came back.
Addie Fitch is pretty sick,
he said.
She's wondering if you got any sugar yet.
Tell her I'm sorry,
Bill Nelson said.
But I still don't have any.
Bill went out into the woods and drove the nail in another inch. The following day, the boy was back.
Addie Fitch is getting sicker,
he said.
She really needs some sugar.
Tell her I don't have any,
Bill answered. Bill's wife was angry.
You gotta stop this,
she said.
If this mumbo-jumbo works, it's like murder. I'll stop it when she does,
he said. Toward dusk, he stood in the yard staring at the ridge where the old lady lived. Wondered what was going on up there. Then in the half-darkness, he saw Addie Fitch coming slowly down the hill toward him, with her pinched, bony face and an old black coat. She did look like a witch. As she got closer, Bill saw that she could barely walk.
Maybe I'm really hurting her,
he thought. He ran to get his hammer to pull the nail out. But before he could leave, Addie Fitch was in the yard, her face twisted with rage.
First you killed my cat,
She said.
then you wouldn't give me a bit of sugar when I needed it.
She swore at him and fell dead at his feet.
I'm not surprised that she dropped dead that way.
The doctor said later.
She was very old, maybe 90. It was her heart, of course.
Some people thought she was a witch.
Bill said.
I heard that.
The doctor said.
Somebody I know thought Addie Fitch had witched him.
Bill went on.
He drew a picture of her on a tree. Then he drove a nail into it to make her stop.
That's old superstition.
The doctor said.
But people like us don't believe in that sort of thing. Do we?
Sam stayed with his grandmother when his parents went to Mexico for their vacation. "We're going to bring you back something nice," his mother told him. "It'll be a surprise." Before they came home, Sam's parents looked for something Sam would like. All they could find was a beautiful sombrero. It cost too much. But that afternoon, while they were out eating at lunch in a park, they decided to buy the sombrero after all. Sam's father threw what was left of their sandwiches to some stray dog and they walked back to the marketplace. One of the animals followed them. It was a small gray creature with short hair, short legs, and a long tail. Wherever they went, it went.
Isn't he cute?
Sam's mother said.
He must be one of those Mexican hairless dogs. Sam would love him.
He's probably someone's pet.
Sam's father said. They asked several people if they knew who its owners were, but no one did. They just smiled and shrugged their shoulders. Finally, Sam's mother said, "Maybe he's just a stray. Let's take him home with us. We can give him a good home and Sam will love him." It's against the law to take a pet across the border, but Sam's parents hid the animal in a box, and no one saw it. And when they got home, they showed it to Sam.
He's a pretty small dog,
said Sam.
He's a Mexican dog.
His father said.
I'm not sure what kind. I think it's called the Mexican hairless. We'll find out, but he's nice, isn't he?
They gave the new pet some dog food, then they washed it and brushed it and combed its fur. That night, it slept on Sam's bed. When Sam awakened the next morning, his pet was still there.
"Mother,"
he called.
"the dog has a cold."
The animal's eyes were running, and there was something white around its mouth. Later that evening, Sam's mother took it to the veterinarian.
"Where did you get him?"
The vet asked.
"In Mexico,"
she said.
"We think he's a Mexican hairless. I was going to ask you about that." "He's not a hairless,"
the vet said.
"He's not even a dog. He's a sewer rat, and he has rabies."
Mrs. Gibbs and her 16-year-old daughter Rosemary arrived in Paris on a hot morning in July. They had been on vacation and now were returning home. But Mrs. Gibbs did not feel well, so they decided to rest in Paris for a few days before going on. The city was crowded with tourists. Still, they found a place to stay at a good hotel. They had a lovely room overlooking a park. It had yellow walls, a blue carpet, and white furniture. As soon as they unpacked, Mrs. Gibbs went to bed. She looked so pale that Rosemary asked to have the hotel's doctor examine her. Rosemary did not speak French, but fortunately the doctor spoke English. He took one look at Mrs. Gibbs and said,
"Oh, mon Dieu, your mother is too sick to travel. Tomorrow I will move her to a hospital, but she needs a certain medicine. If you go to my home for it, it will save time."
The doctor said he did not have a telephone right now. Instead, he would give Rosemary a note for his wife. The hotel manager put Rosemary in a taxi.
and in French, told the driver how to find the doctor's house.
It will only take a little while,
he told her.
and the taxi will bring you back.
But as the driver slowly drove up one street and down another, it seemed to take forever. At one point, Rosemary was sure they'd gone down the same street twice. It took almost as long for the doctor's wife to answer the door, then get the medicine ready. As Rosemary sat on a bench in the empty waiting room, she kept thinking, "Why can't you hurry? Please hurry!" Then she heard a telephone ring somewhere in the house, but the doctor had told her he didn't have a telephone right now. What was going on? They drove back as slowly as they had come, crawling up one street and down another. Rosemary sat in the back seat filled with dread, her mother's medicine clutched in her hand. Why was everything taking so long? She was sure the taxi driver was going in the wrong direction.
Are you going to the right hotel?
She asked. He didn't answer. She asked again, but he still didn't reply. When he stopped for a traffic light, she threw open the door and ran from the cab. She stopped a woman on the street. The woman did not speak English, but she knew someone who did. Rosemary was right. They had been driving in the wrong direction. When she had finally gotten back to the hotel, it was early evening. She went up to the desk clerk who had given them their room.
I'm Rosemary Gibbs.
She said.
My mother and I are in room 505. May I please have the key?
The clerk looked at her closely.
You must be mistaken.
He said.
There is another guest in that room. Are you sure you're in the right hotel?
He turned to help someone else. She waited until he was finished.
You gave us that room yourself when we arrived this morning.
She said.
How could you forget?
He stared at her as if she had lost her mind.
You must be mistaken.
He said.
I have never seen you before. Are you sure you are in the right hotel?
She asked to see the registration card they'd filled out when they arrived.
It's June and Rosemary Gibbs.
She said. The clerk looked in the file.
We have no card for you.
He said.
You must be in the wrong hotel.
The hotel doctor will know me.
Rosemary replied.
He examined my mother when we arrived. He sent me for medicine she needs. I want to see him.
The doctor came downstairs.
Here's the medicine for my mother.
Rosemary said, holding it out to him.
Your wife gave it to me.
I've never seen you before.
He said.
You must be in the wrong hotel.
She asked for the hotel manager who had put her in the taxi. Surely he would remember her.
You must be in the wrong hotel.
He said.
Let me give you a room where you can rest. Then maybe you will remember where you and your mother are staying.
I want to see our room.
Rosemary said, raising her voice.
It's room 505.
But it was nothing like the room she remembered. It had a double bed, not twin beds. The furniture was black, not white. The carpet was green, not blue. There was someone else's clothing in the closet. The room she knew had vanished, and so had her mother.
This is not the room.
She said.
Where's my mother? What have you done with her?
You are in the wrong hotel.
The manager said patiently, as if he were speaking to a young child. Rosemary asked to see the police.
My mother. Our things, the room, they have all disappeared.
She told them.
Are you sure you're in the right hotel?
They asked. She went to her embassy for help.
Are you sure it's the right hotel?
They asked. Rosemary thought that she was losing her mind.
Why don't you rest here for a while?
They said.
Then maybe you'll remember.
A man named Rupert lived with his dog in a house deep in the woods. Rupert was a hunter and a trapper. The dog was a big German shepherd named Sam. Rupert had raised Sam from a pup. Almost every morning, Rupert went hunting, and Sam stayed behind and guarded the house. One morning, as Rupert was checking his traps,
he got the feeling that something was wrong at home. He hurried back as fast as he could, but when he got there, he found that Sam was missing. He searched the house and the woods nearby, but Sam was nowhere to be seen. He called and he called, but the dog did not answer. For days, Rupert looked for Sam, but he could find no trace of him. Finally, he gave up and went back to his work. Well, one morning, he heard something moving in the attic. He picked up his gun. Then he thought, I'd better be quiet about this. So he took off his boots, and in his bare feet, he began to climb the attic stairs. He slowly took one step, then another, until at last he reached the attic door. He stood outside listening, but he didn't hear a thing. Then he opened the door, and you'd scream too if you stepped on a nail in your bare feet.
Lucy Morgan was an artist. She had spent a week painting in a small country town and decided that the next day she would move on. She would go to a village called Kingston. But that night Lucy Morgan had a strange dream. She dreamed that she was walking up a dark carved staircase and entered a bedroom. It was an ordinary room except for two things. The carpet was made up of large squares that looked like trapdoors, and each of the windows was fastened shut with big nails that stuck up out of the wood. In her dream, Lucy Morgan went to sleep in that bedroom. During the night, a woman with a pale face and black eyes and long black hair came into the room. She leaned over the bed and whispered,
This is an evil place. Flee while you can.
When the woman touched her arm to hurry her along, Lucy Morgan awakened from her dream with a shriek. She lay awake for the rest of the night, trembling. In the morning, she told her landlady that she had decided not to go to Kingston after all.
I can't tell you why,
she said,
but I just can't bring myself to go there. Then why don't you go to Dorset?
The landlady said.
It's a pretty town, and it's not too far.
So, Lucy Morgan went to Dorset. Someone told her she could find a room in a house at the top of the hill. It was a pleasant-looking house, and the landlady there, a plump, motherly woman, was as nice as could be.
The room,
she said.
I think you'll like it.
They walked up the dark carved staircase, like the one in Lucy's dream.
In these old houses, the staircases are all the same,
Lucy thought. But when the landlady opened the door to the bedroom, it was the room in her dream, with the same carpet that looked like trapdoors, and the same windows fastened with big nails.
This is just a coincidence,
Lucy told herself.
How do you like it?
The landlady asked.
I'm not sure,
she said.
Well, take your time,
the landlady said.
I'll bring you up some tea while you think about it.
Lucy sat on the bed staring at the trapdoors and the big nails. Soon there was a knock on the door. It's the landlady with the tea, she thought. But it wasn't the landlady. It was the woman with the pale face and the black eyes and the long black hair. Lucy Morgan grabbed her things and fled.
Travel northwest in the desert from Del Rio, Texas, and eventually you'll come to the Devil's River. In the 1830s, a trapper named John Dent and his wife Molly settled where Dry Creek runs into Devil's River. Dent was after beaver, which were plentiful there. He and Molly built a cabin from brush, and near it they put up an arbor to give them some shade. Molly Dent became pregnant. When she was ready to have their child, John Dent raced on horseback to the nearest neighbors, several miles away.
My wife is having a baby,
he said to the man and his wife.
Can you help us?
They agreed to come at once. As they got ready to leave, a violent storm came up and a bolt of lightning struck and killed John Dent. The man and his wife managed to find his cabin, but did not arrive until the next day. By then, Molly Dent was dead too. It looked as if she had given birth before she died, but the neighbors could not find the baby. Since there were wolf tracks all around, they decided the wolves had eaten it. They buried Molly Dent and left. A number of years after she died, people began to tell a strange tale. Some swore it was a true story. Others said it could never happen. The story begins in a small settlement a dozen miles from Molly Dent's grave. Early one morning, a pack of wolves raced in from the desert and killed some goats. Such attacks were not unusual in those days, but a boy thought he saw a naked young girl with long blonde hair running with the wolves. A year or two later, a woman came up upon some wolves eating a goat they had just killed. Eating the goat with them, she claimed, was a naked young girl with long blonde hair. When the wolves and the girl saw her, they fled. The woman said that at first the girl ran on all fours. Then she stood and ran like a human, swiftly as the wolves. People started wondering if this wolf girl was Molly Dent's daughter. Had a mother wolf carried her off the day she was born and raised her with her pups? If so, by now she would be 10 or 11 years old. As the story is told, some men began to look for the girl. They searched along the riverbanks and in the desert and its canyons. And one day, it is said, they found her, walking in a canyon with a wolf at her side. When the wolf ran off, the girl hid in an opening in one of the canyon walls. When the men tried to capture her, she fought back, biting and scratching like an enraged animal. When they finally subdued her, she began screaming like a frightened young girl and howling like a frightened young wolf. Her captors bound her with rope, put her across a horse, and took her to the small ranch house in the desert. They would turn her over to the sheriff the next day, they decided. They placed her in an empty room and untied her. Terror-stricken, she hid in the shadows. They left her and locked the door. Soon, she was screaming and howling again. The men thought that they would go mad listening to her, but at last she stopped. When night fell, wolves began howling in the distance. People say that each time they stopped, the girl howled in reply. As the story goes, the cries of wolves came from every direction and got closer and closer. Suddenly, as if a signal had been given, wolves attacked the horses and other livestock. The men rushed into the darkness, firing their guns. High up in the wall, in the room where they had left the girl, was a small window. A plank was nailed across. She pulled the plank off, crawling through the window, and disappeared. Years passed with no word of the girl. Then one day, some men on horseback came around a bend in the Rio Grande, not far from Devil's River. They claimed they saw a young woman with long blonde hair feeding 2 wolf pups. When she saw the men, she snatched up the pups and ran into the brush. They rode after her, but she quickly left them behind. They searched and searched, but found no trace of her. That is the last we know of the wolf girl. And it is there in the desert, near the Rio Grande, that this story ends. The village huddled on the edge of a vast swamp. As far as one could see, there were soggy meadows, holes filled with black water, and glistening sheets of wet, spongy peat. Skeletons of giant trees, snags the people called them, rose up out of the muck, their dead branches reaching out like long, twisted arms. During the day, the men in the village cut the peat and hauled it home to dry and sell for fuel. But when the sun went down, and the wind, sighing and moaning, came in from the sea, the men were quick to leave. Strange creatures took over the swamp at night, and some even came into the village. That's what everyone said. People were so afraid they would not go out alone after dark. Young Tom Pattison was the only person in the village who did not believe in these creatures. On his way home from work, he'd whisper to his friends,
There's one there!
Finally, some of his friends turned on him.
If you know so much,
They said,
go back into the swamp some night and see what comes of it.
I'll do it.
said Tom.
I work out there every day. Not once have I ever seen anything to frighten me. Why should it be different at night? Tomorrow night, I'll take my lantern and I'll walk out to the willow snag. If I get scared and run, I'll never make fun of you again.
The next night, the men went to Tom Patterson's house to see him on his way. Thick clouds covered the moon. It was the blackest of nights. When they arrived, Tom's mother was pleading with him not to go.
I'll be all right.
He said.
There's nothing to be afraid of. Don't be foolish like the rest.
He took his lantern and, singing to himself, headed down the spongy path towards the willow snag. Some of the young men wondered if Tom wasn't right. Maybe they were afraid of things that did not exist. A few decided to follow him and see for themselves, but they stayed far behind in case he ran into trouble. They were sure they saw dark shapes moving about, but Tom's lantern kept bobbling up and down, and Tom's songs kept floating back to them and nothing happened. Finally, they caught sight of the willow snag. There was Tom standing in a circle of light, looking this way and that. All of a sudden, the wind blew out his lantern, and Tom stopped singing. The men stood stock still in the blackness, waiting for something awful to happen. The clouds shifted and the moon came out. There was Tom again. Only now he had his back pushed up against the willow snag, and he had his arms out in front of him, as if he were fighting something off. From where the men stood, it looked like dark shapes were swirling in around him. Then the clouds covered the moon again. Once more, it was as black as pitch. When the moon came out again, Tom was hanging on to the willow snag with one arm. His other arm was stretched out in front of him, as if something was pulling it. It looked to the men as if a rotting, moldy hand with no arm, a dead hand, had grabbed Tom's hand. With one final wrench, whatever had hold of Tom jerked him into the muck. That's what the men said. When the clouds blotted out the moon once more, the men turned and ran through the blackness towards the village. Again and again they lost the path and fell into the muck and water holes. In the end, they crawled back on their hands and knees, but Tom Patterson was not with them. In the morning, the people searched everywhere for Tom. Finally, they gave him up for lost. A few weeks later, towards evening, the villagers heard a cry. It was Tom's mother. She was rushing down the path from the swamp, shouting and waving. When she was sure the villagers had spotted her, she turned and ran back. Off they went after her. They found young Tom Patterson by the willow snag, groaning and gibbering as if he had lost his mind. He kept pointing with one hand at something only he could see. Where his other hand should have been, there was nothing but a ragged stump oozing blood. The hand had been ripped clean off. Everybody said it was the dead hand that had done it. But nobody really knows. Nobody will ever know, except Tom Patterson. And he never spoke another word again.